Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take, well, usually a stack of fascinating sources. Today it's one really thought-provoking book, and we try to unpack the essential insights you need, to feel genuinely well-informed.
Yeah, and today we're tackling something that hits close to home for everyone.
hmm
Health and longevity.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. When you're deciding, say, whether to take that daily supplement, or maybe you're thinking about getting medical advice for something minor, are you really making the most informed choice?
Or are there hidden traps? Unseen forces, maybe profound misunderstandings we're just not aware of.
That's the core question, isn't it? So our mission today is to pull out the crucial insights from two really pivotal chapters of Nassim Nicholas Taleb's book, Antifragile.
Right, we're looking at Chapter 21, Medicine, Convexity, and Opacity, and Chapter 22, To Live Long but Not Too Long. Think of this as your deep audio overview. We want to distill the essence of these, let's be honest, pretty challenging chapters into some actionable wisdom.
We're aiming to uncover how randomness, volatility, and often, frankly, a lack of deep understanding of complex systems can really impact our well-being.
And crucially, what we can do about it. It's about getting to the root of what truly makes us better, not just what seems like it should.
Definitely. And let's be clear, this isn't your typical health advice show. We're not giving medical prescriptions here.
No, not at all. This deep dive is based squarely on Taleb's work, which offers this unique, often quite counterintuitive lens on health. Sometimes, he suggests, less is genuinely more.
And that certain kinds of discomfort, maybe even stress, can actually be beneficial, essential even for being robust.
That's the idea. So let's start with what Taleb calls the healer's harm. It's a concept that really makes you pause and rethink the foundations of modern medicine.
Yeah, healer's harm. Where does that come from?
Well, Chapter 21, Medicine, Convexity, and Opacity, jumps right into this idea of iatrogenics. This is a Greek term, literally meaning brought forth by the healer.
Okay, so harm caused by the treatment itself.
Exactly. And Taleb argues that while some iatrogenics are obvious, a botched surgery, a bad drug reaction.
Yeah, things you can point to.
Right. But the really insidious kind, he says, is silent iatrogenics. This is the cumulative, often untraceable harm that comes from interventions that are unnecessary or maybe just poorly understood in the grand scheme of things.
Wow, okay, so it shifts the focus from just what a doctor does to the sort of net effect of their actions, including all those unintended side effects.
Precisely. And he draws this really stark contrast between, let's say, the wisdom of the ancients and our modern tendency towards interventionism.
How so? Where does he take us?
He goes back to the medieval Semitic world, talking about figures like Maimonides, Avicenna, Hunayn, Ibn Ishaq. These weren't just doctors in our sense.
Right, I think the term was al-Hakim.
Exactly. Al-Hakim, the wise one, or practitioner of wisdom. Their approach was this blend of deep philosophy and practical application. They were deeply skeptical of pure theory if it wasn't grounded in real-world experience, what Taleb calls naive rationalism.
So less abstract theory, more hands-on observation.
Yes, very much so. He contrasts them with the Hellenized, skeptical, empirical school people like Sextus Empiricus, Notitus of Nicomedia, who really emphasized direct experience over abstract ideas.
So there's this historical tension between doing and thinking, between practical wisdom and theoretical knowledge.
That's the dialectic he highlights. And his argument is that today we've tilted heavily towards prioritizing theory and intervention. We get obsessed with the why based on our models, which are often simplified.
Instead of just observing what works and has worked reliably for a long, long time.
Exactly. And that setup leads us straight into what he calls the sucker problem.
Okay, the sucker problem. What's that about? Sounds ominous.
It ties into naive interventionism. The core principle Taleb pushes is via negativa in medicine.
Via negativa, by way of negation, defining what not to do.
Precisely. The rule he proposes is pretty stark. You only resort to medical techniques when the health payoff is huge, visibly, obviously exceeding any potential harm.
Like life-saving surgery, you mentioned penicillin earlier. Things where the benefit is massive and immediate.
Undeniable benefits. But, and here's the sucker problem. If the perceived benefits are small, maybe just for comfort, or for things that just feel like they should help.
We want to do something, right?
Exactly. That's when we risk putting ourselves on the wrong side of convexity effects.
Yeah.
Imagine, like, small interventions, each with a tiny, tiny chance of causing some hidden harm.
Okay.
Over time, those tiny chances don't just add up, they can multiply non-linearly. You could end up with a much larger, unforeseen problem down the road.
Like playing a game where you win pennies most of the time, but occasionally lose your house? You're the sucker in that game.
That's the essence of it. It's a Thalesian approach, focusing on the payoffs, the outcomes, and critically the downsides, not just the procedure or the theory itself, understanding the asymmetry.
Which connects to how we think about evidence, doesn't it? Taleb seems to argue we misunderstand it.
Completely. He argues that anything non-natural, a new drug, a synthetic compound, needs to rigorously prove its benefits and the absence of significant hidden harms. Burden of proof is high.
But for natural things, things humans have done for ages.
The natural, the traditional, things our bodies have adapted to over millennia, those are considered robust until proven otherwise. In complex areas like health, long time is the ultimate proof.
So if people have fasted intermittently for centuries or walked long distances?
There's likely some deep, maybe hidden wisdom there, even if we can't write down the exact biochemical pathway on paper yet. We should be very cautious about improving on it just because our current theory doesn't fully explain it.
That feels, yeah, almost backward to how we usually operate. We demand RCTs for an older, but maybe accept a new drug based on shorter-term studies focusing only on the intended effect.
Which brings us to those hidden nonlinearities in medical outcomes. Taleb uses this anecdote, I think it was, about a doctor reducing swelling.
Oh yeah, reducing swelling even though there wasn't clear evidence it helped, or that the swelling itself was the real problem. Seems harmless enough.
But he calls it sucker rationalism. It's intervention just for the sake of intervening. It stems from that bias for action and maybe a subtle denigration of the body's own natural healing processes, the stuff that happens without the doctor doing something visible.
It undervalues the unseen.
Precisely. And he mentions psychologists Paul Meehl and Robin Dawes, their work on clinical versus actuarial knowledge.
Expert intuition versus statistical models.
Right. And often, the simple models outperform the experts. Caleb argues many professional beliefs in medicine might lack really solid empirical backing, relying more on tradition or flawed reasoning. And crucially, the medical community often uses linear thinking for risks.
Assuming things scale predictably?
Yes, but biological responses are rarely straight lines. They're curves, often dramatic ones. So we might underestimate the cumulative harm of small interventions, or overestimate the benefits because we miss the nonlinearity.
And then you throw in the incentives. The pharmaceutical industry.
Ah, yes, the elephant in the room. Taleb argues pharma companies are heavily incentivized to, well, find new diseases or reclassify conditions among healthier people.
Like pre-hypertension you mentioned, or turning normal mood variations into mild depression.
Exactly. Then they lobby for more medication for these wider categories. He calls this a game of concealed and distributed iatrogenics.
Concealed and distributed, meaning the harm isn't obvious or tied to one specific error.
Right. It's spread out across a large population, making it hard to pin down, but the aggregate effect could be huge. It's an agency problem. The doctor's or company's interests might not align perfectly with your long-term health. The harm gets diffused.
This seems connected to a mathematical idea he uses. Jensen's inequality. How does that fit in?
Okay, so Jensen's inequality, in simple terms, shows that if you are antifragile to something, meaning you benefit from volatility, your response is convex, curved upwards.
Like a little bit is okay, but a lot is disproportionately better, or maybe a little stress makes you stronger.
Something like that. If your response is convex, then you're actually better off having that thing delivered randomly or variably rather than steadily. The variation itself can be beneficial, more so than the average amount.
Wait, so less steady, more variable exposure is better. That really goes against the grain. We always aim for stability in health, right? Keep things constant.
That's the common wisdom, but Taleb challenges it. Take his example of mechanical ventilators for lung diseases. The initial thinking was, okay, weakened lungs need constant, steady pressure. Makes sense, right? Stability for fragility.
Seems logical.
But lungs are actually anti-fragile to pressure. They respond nonlinearly. What some researchers found back in the 70s was that occasional random spikes in pressure variability actually helped open up collapsed air sacs, the alveoli, and patient mortality decreased.
So the noise, the variation that healthy lungs experience naturally was actually helpful.
Exactly. The very variability they tried to eliminate turned out to be beneficial. The lungs needed that randomness. It shows how nonlinearity flips our intuition.
That is fascinating. Our bodies aren't just simple machines needing steady inputs.
Not at all. Another example he uses is the statin dilemma. He brings in his turkey problem analogy.
The turkey getting fed every day thinking the farmer loves it until Thanksgiving.
Right. So Taleb points out data suggesting you need to treat, say, 50 high-risk people with statins for 5 years to prevent just one cardiovascular event. He questions the hidden, long-term harm for the less sick individuals taking these drugs.
The ones who aren't the turkeys about to face Thanksgiving but are generally okay.
Yes, he suspects there's a reliance on statistical bundling, mixing the very ill with the moderately healthy, and assuming cholesterol levels are a perfect proxy for health for everyone. This could create a diffuse, long-term harm for many people, silent iatrogenics again, while the benefits are concentrated in a smaller, sicker group.
So again, it's via negativa. Maybe not taking the statin is the better bet for many, unless the risk is demonstrably huge.
That's the implication, especially when you consider the complexity and the potential for unknown long-term effects. Which brings us back to that idea of what we think we know versus what actually works. The green lumber fallacy in medicine.
Right. The trader who made money on green lumber without knowing it meant unseasoned, not the color green. He knew what worked, not necessarily why.
Exactly. Taleb stresses that phenomenology, the empirical result, what you actually observe happening, is often way more reliable than our theories about why it's happening, especially for making policy.
Like with muscle building.
Perfect example. The theories change. Its metabolism, know its insulin sensitivity, maybe something else next year. But the effect of lifting weights and eating certain foods to build muscle and lose fat, that stays remarkably constant. The observation, the green lumber, is the solid part.
Not the ever-changing theoretical explanation.
Right. And this ties into what he calls the neuro-something problem.
Ah, slapping neuro onto things to make them sound scientific.
Yeah, neuro-linguistic programming, neuroeconomics. He sees a lot of it as psychoneurobabble. It sounds impressive, especially because the brain is so complex, but it might just be linguistic fluff appealing to our desire for neat, causal explanations. The brain becomes the last province of the theoretician charlatan.
Where vague theories can sound profound because nobody can easily disprove them.
Precisely. And he circles back to those historical medical traditions. Rationalists, theory first. Skeptical empiricists, observation first. Methodists, follow proven rules. He notes how some schools of thought, like certain strains in Arabic philosophy, sometimes prioritize theoretical elegance over messy empirical data.
Which might work in math, but maybe not so well in biology.
Could be a weakness. He cites James LeFanu, who observed that counterintuitively a deeper theoretical understanding of biology in the mid-20th century actually coincided with a slowdown in major pharmaceutical discoveries.
Really, more understanding led to fewer breakthroughs.
That's the observation LeFanu made, suggesting a kind of green lumber problem, maybe focusing too much on the why, according to current theory, blinded researchers, to practical empirical solutions that didn't fit the model. Knowing why potentially got in the way of finding what works.
That's a powerful cautionary tale about the limits of our understanding. Okay, that really sets the stage for rethinking intervention. Now, let's shift gears to chapter 22. To live long, but not too long. This one sounds like it challenges the goal itself.
Oh, it absolutely does. Taleb goes right after what he calls the sophistry of longevity. You know the argument. Anytime you question modern tech or medicine, someone says, well, we live longer now.
Yeah, it's presented as the ultimate trump card. Progress is good because longevity.
He says that's a fallacy. It's like saying you have to accept all aspects of modern industrial food production because you don't want to go back to, I don't know, medieval peasant life. The nuance is key.
It's not about rejecting progress, but questioning the type of long life we're chasing.
Exactly. Is it just more years, or is it quality of years? Are we aiming for robust vitality or just prolonging what he calls a sick animal existence, dependent on tons of pills and procedures?
That's a stark image. And this leads him back to ancient wisdom again, right? This time about food or lack thereof.
Yes, about scant nourishment.
Yeah.
He brings up Plotinus saying scantiness of nourishment restores the system. And the Salerno School of Medicine's simple regimen. Joyful mood, rest, moderate diet.
Simple stuff. You mentioned Pomponius Atticus, too.
Yeah, the apocryphal story of this Roman guy living a long, healthy life by basically avoiding doctors and eating moderately. The theme is subtraction, moderation, absence of excess.
Which connects directly to his personal via negativa approach.
Absolutely. He advocates passionately for systematically removing what he calls offensive irritants from your life. And his list is, well, it's provocative. Things like morning newspapers, especially opinion columnists, he sees as fragilistas. Adding noise, he names names like Thomas Friedman, Paul Krugman. Also, your boss, the daily commute, constant air conditioning, too much TV, the endless stream of emails, economic forecasts, stock market news.
Even certain gym machines.
Right. things that replace natural, variable movement with specialized, maybe fragilizing routines. His claim is personal, but he says removing these things brought a huge jump in his own health and well-being. Far more than adding supplements or complex diets.
It's striking, not adding, but subtracting things that cause chronic low-level stress or mess with our natural systems, building resilience by elimination.
Exactly. And speaking of natural systems, he digs into nature's anti-fragile mechanisms around hunger and randomness in our biology.
This is the fasting part.
Yes, he explains that biological systems are actually activated by periods of food deprivation, not constant restriction, but occasional intermittent fasting.
And the mechanism is autophagy.
Autophagy, yeah. Literally self-eating. It's the process where cells clean house, breaking down and recycling old, damaged parts. Think of it as a cellular vacuum cleaner.
Triggered by scarcity.
The theory is that occasional starvation kicks this process into high gear, promoting cellular health and longevity. It's a renewal cycle prompted by deprivation.
And there's modern research backing this up now, isn't there? He mentions Walter Longo's work.
He does. Longo's work is fascinating. Taleb notes observations like prisoners in concentration camps initially getting less sick from food restriction after the weakest succumbed, of course, and Longo's mice studies.
The ones that could withstand massive chemo doses if they were starved first.
Exactly. Doses that would kill normally fed mice. It seems linked to turning up the activity, upregulating certain longevity genes, like SARNSER1, in response to hunger.
It really reframes stress. Scarcity isn't just bad. It triggers powerful adaptive responses. Our bodies expect it, maybe even need it.
And he extends this to when we eat. He questions the whole breakfast before activity dogma.
Because in nature, you expend energy first. Hunt, then eat.
Right. A lion hunts, then eats. Giving your body fuel before it's needed might confuse biological signals, telling it energy is abundant when it hasn't done any work yet.
So maybe a more variable eating pattern tied to activity is more natural and healthier.
That's the suggestion. Again, embracing variability over rigid, potentially unnatural schedules.
Which totally flies in the face of decades of breakfast is the most important meal advice. It's not just food either. He talks about movement, specifically walking.
Effortless walking. He really pushes back against dismissing simple, natural walking as useless just because it doesn't feel like a hard workout and replacing it with cars or intense gym sessions.
He compares it to how people used to think sleep was wasted time.
Yeah, trying to shorten it based on naive rationalism, only to find out it's absolutely vital. He suggests that effortless walking, below stress levels, just moving naturally, might be as fundamental for humans as sleep. Our ancestors did a lot of both.
So respect these deeply ingrained ancestral behaviors, even if we don't have a neat peer-reviewed study for every aspect of it yet. Trust the phenomenology, the long experience.
It's that green lumber idea again. Trust what has worked for millennia over modern theories that might miss the point. Our bodies thrive on certain kinds of natural stress and variation.
Okay, so we've hit on physical health, intervention dangers, natural stressors, but Chapter 22 goes even deeper, right? Into ethics, mortality, collective anti-fragility. This gets really philosophical.
It really does. Taleb brings back this profound, maybe uncomfortable idea. The anti-fragility of the whole system. Humanity, a species, an ecosystem, relies on the fragility and mortality of its individual parts.
So individuals have to be fragile to die for the collective to survive and adapt.
In a fundamental way, yes. The species is anti-fragile because individuals are mortal. It constantly renews itself. This shifts the focus dramatically. It's not just about extending your individual life indefinitely.
It's about contributing to the collective. Through what? Offspring, ideas.
Offspring, yes. But also through robust information ideas, books, strong cultural practices that survive, and through taking risks that benefit the whole, even if they harm you personally, your genes, your truly anti-fragile ideas, that's what survives and gets stronger from shocks over time.
That sounds like a callback to older ideals, maybe heroism, purpose beyond just self-preservation. And he contrasts this with middle-class values.
Yeah, he has a pretty pointed critique of what he sees as a glorified, heroism-free existence.
What does that look like to him?
He paints a picture. Maybe working hard for a company whose product might even be harmful. He uses tobacco companies as a stark example. Being stuck in corporate captivity, overly concerned with your boss's opinion, chasing suburban comfort, relying solely on stock market gains for security, seeing tropical vacations as the main goal or escape.
A life focused on minimizing personal downside, maximizing comfort.
Exactly. But he argues this actually makes you deeply fragile and contributes little to the collective's ability to withstand shocks. It avoids meaningful risk.
And the alternative is,
A life that involves some skin in the game. Taking risks, contributing genuinely, maybe even voluntary heroism. He brings up Roman gladiators who chose the arena for honor, not just slaves forced into it.
choosing exposure to downside, but for a purpose.
Yes, for honor, for something bigger than mere survival, or Socrates choosing death over compromising his beliefs. Taleb sees true strength in taking risks for convictions, embracing uncertainty, not trying to smooth out every bump and insulate yourself from all harm.
It's about engaging with the world's randomness for a deeper meaning, which then, paradoxically, strengthens the collective even if the individual is fragile.
That's the core idea. Individual fragility serves collective anti-fragility.
Okay, let's try to tie this all together. We've journeyed from medical harm to fasting benefits to the ethics of mortality. What's the big thread running through chapters 21 and 22?
I think unequivocally, it's the power of via negativa, subtraction. Knowing what to avoid, what to remove, that seems to be the most robust path to anti-fragility.
Whether it's avoiding unnecessary medical treatments, removing chronic stressors from your life, avoiding fragile financial strategies.
Exactly. Focus on minimizing harm from the unknown, the things you can identify as potentially damaging or destabilizing, rather than trying to predict and optimize everything. Removing fragility is often more effective than trying to engineer robustness from scratch.
And that green lumber fallacy keeps popping up. Our theories, our intellectual understanding can actually get in the way.
Yeah, we focus on the superficial why we think we understand and miss the deep empirical reality of what works or what has survived. We get blinded by our own cleverness sometimes.
Chasing explanations instead of observing results.
Right. And then there's that fundamental tension, that paradox. Individual fragility is often necessary for collective anti-fragility. The failed startup helps the market learn. The organism dying allows the species to adapt.
It forces a shift from purely individual thinking to a more systemic evolutionary perspective. So how does this translate for you, listening right now? How can you use these ideas beyond just health? Can you see your own life through this anti-fragile lens?
Well, these principles really are universal. Think about your finances. Are you taking supposedly medium risks that could blow up unexpectedly? Or are you maybe using a barbell approach, very safe in some areas, lots of small, capped downside risks in others?
Or your career? Are you in a comfortable but fragile golden jail? Or are you embracing challenges, learning from mistakes, exposing yourself to stresses that ultimately make you stronger and more adaptable?
Even how you consume information. Are you drowning in noise, the constant chatter Taleb warns about? Or are you filtering for real signals, things with staying power, practicing via negativa with your attention?
It really is a challenge to so much conventional wisdom. This whole deep dive suggests that our attempts to suppress all randomness, to control everything, often backfire and make us more fragile.
And that maybe the greatest strength comes from embracing the messy reality, the unpredictable, the difficult. Looking at discomfort or minor illness, not just as enemies to be crushed immediately, but maybe as signals, or even necessary stressors.
Yeah. Which leads us to a final provocative thought for you to take away.
If true anti-fragility comes from embracing randomness, not suppressing it, and maybe accepting individual fragility for the sake of the collective, how might that fundamentally shift your own understanding of success, risk, maybe even purpose?
Where in your own life might you be unconsciously fragilizing yourself? Seeking too much stability, always adding complex solutions instead of subtracting harmful things, sticking to theories over observed reality, just something to reflect on.
Think about where you could benefit from embracing variation, and maybe the surprising wisdom of less is more.
We'll leave you with that thought. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive, and we'll be back next time.